Hi, this is Emery Goerig.
Hi, I'm Riley Debiec, and our goal is to define and measure poverty, but in order to do that, we have to rethink it first. There are three main definitions of poverty we want to focus on. The first one is the 1904 definition, which defines poverty as the extinction of physical life. It's looking at people who are physically dying, ill-equipped to live, and those are the people who are in poverty, but anybody above that threshold isn't in poverty. That's a very harsh measure, but the next one is absolute definition, which is defines poverty as economic deprivation. It's looking at money, resources somebody has, and solely focusing on their income. The more relative definition, which is something that's more currently being accepted, is the definition that defines poverty as comparative disadvantage relative to society's existing living conditions. So it's looking at more holistically how somebody in poverty could be affected because of their social disadvantages, but also their time and place that they live in.
There are lots of misconceptions when it comes to poverty. Lots of people think that people in poverty don't care to leave poverty, or that getting a job is the key to escaping poverty. But one of the most common misconceptions people have is associating poverty with homelessness. While someone who is homeless may be in poverty, not all those in poverty are homeless. So our definition of poverty is a person's lack of monetary resources that hinders their quality of life and their ability to be socially involved within society. So then a quote we have for that is, those whose resources are significantly below the resources of others, even if they are physically able to survive, may not be able to participate adequately in social organizations and relationships, and thus are incapable of fully participating in society.
Yeah, two of the things we wanted to focus on in our definition was money and social abilities and social functionings, and they can overlap because money buys resources, and certain resources like car, work attire, and cell phones are necessary for someone to have a job and function in society. So that is how money and social needs intersect. One major type of measurement used to measure poverty is the official poverty measure. This was developed in 1964 by Molly Orshansky, and it is taken from a food consumption survey fact that 1/3 of families' income is spent on food. Molly Orshansky multiplied this by 3 to find out how much a family uses on their income and spends for resources. She adjusted this for family size and inflation relative to the year. So the official poverty measure offers an objective, absolute glance at poverty. If someone is involuntarily starving, they are considered poor. So it's a very binary system compared to other measures, but it is a good baseline to compare with more relative measures. The cons of OPM is that the statistic was from 1964. Now families have a lot more that they might spend on their income, including higher taxes, transportation, and medical care costs. So now people are finding more than 1/3 of an income is spent. It's more like 1/6 of their income is spent on food. So it's not exactly as accurate as one might presume. It only measures on cash income. It doesn't include government aid, and it only looks at married families and kids living in the house. This doesn't obviously measure cohabiting couples, which is a very prevalent thing in society today. One main type of measurement is the supplemental poverty measurement, and this is developed more recently. It factors in household cash income as well as non-cash benefits that somebody might be receiving, so government aid that is coming into their and adding to their total income. It takes away taxes, and it takes away non-discretionary expenses like childcare costs that somebody might have to spend their money on without choice. This allows for a more accurate depiction of what a family's budget in poverty might look like. The way the threshold is measured is based on foods, clothing, shelter, and utilities multiplied by 1.2. The 0.2 is coming from the extra added costs that aren't included in the food, shelter, clothing, and utilities, and it cuts off at 33% of the median income. So that is the equation for the SPM. But some advantages include that it is adjusted for geographic differences. So in some states it might be more expensive, the cost of living, than other states, so it addresses that issue, as well as it looks at household, and it measures the number of people in the household instead of just measuring family as a married unit. It can also add in cohabiting couples. Another pro of the SPM is that it raises standards of living raise. So as our country develops and more expenses are needed for cable, for television, for cell phones, it factors in these extra needed costs as our society develops, and so it adjusts based on the current time and place that somebody might be living in. Some negative impacts of the SPM is that it's based on median income. So if a median income rises, the threshold rises with it, meaning that people technically will never escape poverty in terms of the numbers and statistics, because they are still under the threshold. So there are some complications with having it be based off of median, because median is a very varying term that changes over time, and if the threshold changes as well, it can have some complications with measuring and depicting who is under the actual threshold. Now, there's no perfect solution or counter argument to this, but the median income is more scaled than other relative measures who cap it off at 60% of median income. The median measure of 33% is recommended by many researchers, and it is also a benefit because it adjusts as the economy changes. It doesn't stay stagnant. Overall, even though both the SPM and OPM are binary systems, meaning that somebody $1 over the threshold is out of poverty, even though they might still be very poor, the SPM has many more advantages than the OPM because it allows for people to understand the productivity of government aid and how effective government is in managing their programs for people in poverty. And conclusions can also be derived from the SPM because it analyzed so much of the places and number of people in the household. This can show different demographic distributions of people in poverty.
Okay, so our measurement is that poverty should be measured similar to the supplemental poverty measure because it is a measure of inequality in conjunction with deficiency, allowing for a narrower threshold that isolates a circumstance based on current time and place. And the reasons why we chose this method as our measurement, we kind of already talked about, but we just feel like it's the most efficient, most effective, and realistic for the way we define poverty. Okay, so we believe that social exclusion is a really big component within poverty. And social exclusion is basically when a person is socially isolated, and then this can be physical or a mental disadvantage, causing a person or a group to feel unimportant within society. So this quote that we used is from Allison, and she was a part of the LGBTQ community, and she was assaulted as a child, so she felt really excluded from society. And she says, "I realized again that some are given no quarter, no chance, that all their courage, humor, and love for each other is just a joke to the ones who make the rules, and I hated the rule makers." So she's kind of talking about how the rule makers are society and society's standards, and those who don't fit those standards really feel excluded. And this can be a really big factor within poverty in the way that we measure it. Okay, so the main causes of social exclusion include low incomes, unemployment, lack of education or health care, limited access to transportation, poor mental or physical health, and then discrimination is a really big one, and that's kind of what we see that Allison faced, which is why she felt really excluded from society. Okay, so the capabilities approach has a lot to do with functionings and capabilities. And functionings are a person's being or doings, and capabilities are their freedom to make these choices. And Nussbaum kind of talks about how starving and fasting is a really big example with this. and how a person who's starving may not have the choice to be able to eat, whereas someone who's fasting does have the option to eat, but is choosing to not eat, maybe because of religion or one of those reasons. So one of the big things we see with the capabilities are Nussbaum's 10 central human capabilities thresholds, and we see that tragic choice is having to choose between one of these things. So for example, say a person is getting abused or harassed or bullied at school, that's risking their bodily integrity, whereas if they choose to not go to school, they're losing their senses, imagination, and thought. So they're kind of having to make a trade-off or tragic choice, since this is more detrimental in regards to human dignity. Okay, Rector's argument is that all poor people aren't necessarily homeless and starving. There's a range. There's a problem with saying 37 million people are in poverty, and the problem equates to household amenities with standard of living. Rector basically thinks that there's lots of people who are in poverty by numbers or statistics, but they would consider their quality of life to be adequate to be out of poverty.
When the general public thinks of poverty, they envision somebody living off the street. It's important to recognize that poverty has a lot of depth to it, and it is more than just lacking money. There's a whole plethora of other factors that are contributed to someone being in poverty. Humans have dignity and deserve for their dignity to be respected. We need to reconsider our preconceived notions of poverty and realize that poverty is part of a greater picture of political oppression, social marginalization, and emotional turbulence. Rethinking poverty will allow us to answer the fundamental question: in what ways are people disadvantaged and how do we fix it?